Okay, now we're going to go into the Congressional Bloc of Southern Democrats. Um, Basically, if you remember from Truman and how he had opposition when he integrated the military, um, it was kind of the same people, the Dixiecrats, that's who he had to deal with. And it's, of course, the people in the South who do not agree with integration. Um, the Democrats in Congress, right, your representatives banded together to keep civil rights laws from passing. Okay, so that's the Congressional Bloc of Southern Democrats. Now you're going to have a couple of important leaders, of course. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a preacher. He got his ideas from Thoreau and Gandhi. And if you remember anything from your world geography class and a little bit of your world history class, Gandhi was a strong believer in nonviolence, right? We know he was a monk, and he believed in the power of not being violent. So Martin Luther King Jr. actually went over to India, met with him, and he liked his ideas, his strategies, and he adopted them. So he had a strong belief in non-violence. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. also believed in civil disobedience, where you basically disobeyed anything that you didn't agree with, but through protests and boycotts and marches, picketing, and demonstrations. That's civil disobedience. When you don't agree with a law, so you're not going to really follow it, and the way you're going to bring attention to it is through the things I just listed. Now, sit-ins at whites only lunch counters, that's what they were popular for or known for. They would not leave the counters until they were attended, and most of these were televised. If you've ever seen the movie The Butler, you're going to see in that movie how they were actually trained to go through this mental and physical abuse from whites at these lunch counters. Okay, so those are sit-ins. We're going to be going over in class on the story of Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old murdered for flirting with a white woman. He was actually visiting from the north. He went to the south and he kind of whistled at a store owner. And her father and her brother went out looking for this kid and they killed him. And the mother of Emmett Till decided to have an open casket in Chicago, which brought a lot of attention to the cause. So we're going to go over that more into detail in class. Writing for Freedom, the Freedom Riders. You have interracial groups that rode buses in the South, and basically it was to help African Americans and other minorities register to vote in the South. They sought to overturn racial segregation in public transportation as well. They created confrontation so that the federal government would have to intervene, right? So they basically were asking for trouble, but just to get that national attention that they needed. Okay, so there you can see the army on the buses themselves. They were often faced with violence and death. And again, if you've seen the movie The Butler, you're able to see examples of what the Freedom Riders had to go through. Right. And again, it wasn't only blacks on the bus, it was blacks and whites, and they were treated the same way. As soon as they got off those buses, they were beat up. They were, rocks were thrown at them, they were stoned. They would, beat them to death, sometimes shoot at them, throw bombs at them, so on and so forth. So those were the Freedom Riders. Now, Martin Luther King has written, as he was in jail, he wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, basically describing what his nonviolent civil disobedience is. He was arrested for leading a march, of course, and that's going to be basically a charge when you are disturbing the peace. The letter explained reasons why African Americans could no longer wait for rights and why something had to be done now. It explained civil disobedience, how it was justified, and because everyone has a moral responsibility where you have the right morally to disobey any unjust law. Any law that is not fair to you, you have the right to not follow it. And that's what civil disobedience was. Now, you're going to have another side to it, African American militancy, right? So Martin Luther King, he was, peaceful protest, and then you're going to have another side to it. It says here, a civil rights movement ended public segregation and discrimination in voting. But it did not end private bias or provide equal opportunities. Dr. King's nonviolent protests were not enough. You're going to have the March on Washington in 1963. Basically, he did this massive march on Washington to create pressure on Congress to pass a civil rights bill to kind of get rid of the poll taxes and anything else, any kind of obstacle that African Americans had to go through when it came to voting. The largest demonstration for human rights in U.S. history. The largest demonstration. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public places, cut federal aid to schools with segregated schools, right? So if your school was segregated where you had them separate, blacks and whites, no money would go to you. It gave power to register voters and to establish an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Again, equal employment. So of course it's going to also not allow you to be segregated in the workplace, which means no more discrimination. Now, Black Power, going back to the other side of it, you're going to have the Black Panthers, which was a political party of African American activists, and they demanded reparations or payment, we've seen that word before, to be given to the black community for centuries of oppression, for being held down for so long and not being treated equal. Malcolm X is going to be their leader, of course. He was a leading black Muslim. He believed violence should be met with violence. The way they treat you, you treat them back, no matter what. And he ended up being assassinated by rival black Muslims in 1965. And in April 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So those were the two main African American civil rights leaders that were both murdered in the 1960s. Okay, and of course, both are going to spark riots. People are going to protest and fight even harder. All right, if you have any questions, you let me know.